All right, so next up, we are going to talk about lists, unordered lists and ordered lists, which are two separate elements. But the way that we create either type of list is by actually combining two elements together. You can see I have a UL element that stands for unordered list. And then I have three LI elements. Each LI is supposed to be a list item. So this is one item in a list, second item, and a third item. All three of them are grouped together in an unordered list. So it's two elements together, and we also are nesting these elements, as you can see. So we open the UL, and then inside the opening and closing tags, we then nest in these LIs. So we use unordered lists when we have lists of elements that are not supposed to be ordered. So by default, they're displayed with bullet points. You can change that. You can turn the bullet points off completely. I'll show you some examples of that. And we'll actually do that when we cover CSS. We use lists all over the place. But let me show you a simple list. Let me delete everything or almost everything I have in here. Sure, let's just put an H1 that says lists. And then I'll put an H2 that says unordered lists. And then to make an unordered list, it's a UL element. On its own, if I refresh, we won't see a thing in that list. So we have to nest LI elements for list items. And let's make an unordered list. Sure, we'll just do a recipe where we have chicken breasts and then other ingredients that we need. So another LI for Parmesan cheese, and one more for tomatoes. There's an E, right? Okay, I think. So this is three elements, and I chose an unordered list because there's no real order here. These are just things we need for a recipe. There isn't an order. It's not a hierarchy. It's not a structured list that says this is the most important, second most, and third most. If I refresh, you'll see that we get bullet points. So chicken breast, Parmesan cheese, and tomatoes. That's an unordered list. Then we have an ordered list, where we use an OL element for ordered list. We still use the same LIs inside. It's the same structure where we nest them inside. So it's not technically valid to do this. As far as this HTML is concerned, you should never have an LI on its own. They belong in one of those two types of lists. Now, if I do this, the browser will still try and figure it out, and it makes it an unordered list for me, but you should not do that. LIs belong in a list. So let's try an ordered list. I'll do an H2 that says ordered list. And maybe this is a list of marathon finishers or something. So we have Joe Schmo, who finished first. And then we have a second LI for Tina Turner. And then another LI for my cat, Blue Steel. So there's an order implied here. It's an ordered list. Each LI is still just an LI, but because it's in an OL, they're displayed differently, and we see numbers. We can also change that. We can make that Roman numerals. We can remove the numbers entirely, but that key difference there is in the structure and the meaning behind a UL versus an OL. There's no order here. There is an order here. And so by default, we get numbers. And why don't we change this to say race finishers, and then this will be recipe ingredients. I can never spell ingredients. I hope that's right. And there we are. Okay, so that's the basics of using lists. Now let me show you some examples of lists. If we go to Wikipedia, I'm sure on this Buffalo Bills article, there's going to be lists somewhere. Let's scroll down. Here's a huge unordered list of playoff games for the Buffalo Bills. So each one of these elements is an LI inside of a UL for unordered list. Keep going down. Here's more unordered lists. Lots of bullet points all over the place. More unordered lists. And then let's see if I can find an ordered list for us. Here we go. This is a list of references, right? The citations at the bottom, they're in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the order matters. It's not just a random bulleted list. They're in a particular order. So this would be an OL. I'm sure if we inspect, there we are. OL filled with a bunch of LIs. Okay, so that's the basics of lists. One thing that we can do with them is nest them. So if I want to have a bulleted list here under ingredients, maybe under tomatoes, there's actually two types of tomatoes I want. I want to have canned tomatoes and fresh tomatoes. So never mind the fact that it's probably easier just to do this and have two LIs, one for canned tomatoes and one for fresh. Let's not do that. And I want to show you how to nest a list inside. What I can do is inside of this LI, right in there, I can add another unordered list. And inside of this unordered list, I can add another list item. Let's go with canned tomatoes, and then a second one for fresh tomatoes. Okay, so if I refresh my page after saving, you can see that we get extra indentation. The default styles are still bulleted, but it's a slightly different bullet point that's not filled in, just to show a difference. But you can change all of that with CSS. So now I've said there's not only one unordered list, there's a second one, and it's actually nested inside of this list item. There's a connection here. So don't do this. This is tempting, but this is technically invalid. The browser still figures it out, but as far as structuring our markup goes, the UL should go inside an LI in this case. And also, I could make this an ordered list. It wouldn't really make sense because is there an order really between canned tomatoes and fresh tomatoes? Probably not. It's just a shopping list or a recipe list. But the browser doesn't care. It will render it as an ordered list. So we can nest things that way. And that's really all that there is. I'll go back to an unordered list. So these are all about providing structure to tell the browser this is a list of connected elements. They're all related, and they either are ordered or they're unordered. We can change the default styles and how they're displayed, but the default is that an unordered list will get bullets and an ordered list gets numbers. Now let me wrap up by just showing some examples of where we might use a list. It's not always a simple bulleted list like we saw in Wikipedia or a simple numbered list. A list really is just any group of connected elements that are somehow tied together in a list. So on this MDN webpage, on the homepage, all of this is a list. This is all connected. These are all elements that are somehow part of, in this case, the recent contributions list. And if I inspect, I think we'll find a list. There it is. Unordered list. Each one of these is a list item. So I just want to be clear there. It's not only typical lists like we see on Wikipedia, an obvious thing with bullet points. We can turn that off, but this is still a list. We're telling the browser these are connected. And another really common place to use lists is actually to build navbars. So we're going to learn how to build navbars when we get to CSS. But if I inspect this navbar, right there is an unordered list. These are 3 links that are connected. They're all part of the navbar, right? And they each are an LI inside of a list. Now they're styled differently, right? They're in a row. Obviously the text is different. They have a background color, this hover effect, but the structure is the same. They are a list. And then each one of these things is it must be a list, and that must be a list, and that must be a list. So there's a lot of use cases for lists. When we only know HTML though, they don't look particularly pretty, but they still have an important structure behind them.